A farm. No rain for 3 weeks. Cracked earth. The kind of heat that turns most gardens into brown, brittle wreckage by the second week of drought. And yet, in the middle of that field, rows of vegetables growing green and heavy and full. Tomatoes swelling, beans climbing, squash spreading wide leaves across dry ground. No irrigation pipes visible, no hose running between the rows, no sprinkler system, no water truck, nothing, just the soil. And buried somewhere inside it, invisible from the surface, something that has been quietly releasing exactly the right amount of water to those roots every single hour. Automatically, passively, without electricity, without pumps, without timers, without anyone touching it. Something made of clay, something that costs almost nothing, something that was perfected over 4,000 years ago and then, somewhere in the last century, almost completely forgotten. This is called an Olla, pronounced Olla. It is a porous, unglazed clay pot, sealed. At the top, buried in the ground up to its neck, filled with water through a small opening at the surface. That's the entire technology. A clay pot, buried, filled with water. And what happens next is one of the most elegant things in all of agriculture. The water seeps slowly through the porous clay walls, drawn outward into the surrounding soil by the roots of nearby plants, released at a rate determined entirely by how thirsty the plants actually are. Not by a timer, not by a sensor, not by you guessing whether the soil feels moist enough this morning, by the plants themselves. The roots create a zone of lower moisture pressure around the pot, and the water moves toward that pressure. Exactly as much as is needed, exactly when it's needed, and almost nowhere else. Studies comparing Olla irrigation to conventional surface watering have documented water savings of between 70 and 95% for equivalent plant growth outcomes. You read that correctly, the same plants, the same food, using as little as 1/20th of the water, with a buried clay pot that a person living 4,000 years ago could make with their hands. The evidence for this method is not speculative and not recent. It spans continents and millennia. Archaeological evidence places clay pot irrigation, Olla systems or equivalent buried clay vessel techniques, in ancient China, ancient Persia, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and pre-Columbian Central and South America. In the Iranian plateau, a system called kademe used buried clay vessels to irrigate crops in desert conditions that would otherwise support no agriculture at all. Researchers at the University of Pretoria in South Africa conducted controlled trials on Olla irrigation and documented yield increases combined with water reductions that the researchers themselves described as dramatic compared to conventional methods. The International Water Management Institute has studied and promoted Olla-style irrigation as a critical technology for small-scale food production in water-stressed regions. Oxfam and other humanitarian organizations have introduced the method to drought-affected farming communities in sub-Saharan Africa and reported consistent adoption because it works visibly and immediately. Agricultural researchers in Brazil, a country where water scarcity in the northeastern semi-arid region affects millions of people, have published extensively on Olla efficiency and advocated for its widespread adoption. The data is there, the history is there, the results are there, and yet, if you walk into any garden center in the developed world today, you will not find a single Olla for sale. You will find smart watering sensors for $60. You will find programmable irrigation timers for $40. You will find drip line kits, soaker hoses, oscillating sprinklers, and every configuration of water delivery technology that requires purchasing, installing, replacing, and upgrading. But you will not find the clay pot that outperforms most of them at a fraction of the cost, and with none of the complexity. That absence is not accidental. You've understood the principle behind this your entire life without knowing it. Think about a clay flower pot, sitting outside after being watered. You've seen the outside of that pot become dark and damp as moisture works its way through the walls. You probably thought that was just water evaporating outward, which is partly true. But what's actually happening at the clay surface is more interesting. The microscopic pores in unglazed clay allow water molecules to pass through when there is a pressure differential, when one side is wetter than the other. The soil surrounding a buried Olla, when populated with actively growing roots, is consistently drier than the water inside the pot. So the pot slowly, continuously releases water toward the drier zone. When it rains, or you surface water and the surrounding soil becomes temporarily saturated, the differential disappears and the seepage slows or stops automatically. The system self-regulates. The pot releases water when the plants need it and holds it when they don't. It's a passive, zero-energy, zero-maintenance feedback loop made of fired earth. The plants are in control of their own irrigation. You are just the person who fills the pot every few days and gets out of the way. The science, simply stated, is this. Unglazed clay is a microporous ceramic material. It has thousands of tiny channels through its walls that are small enough to create surface tension with water. meaning water doesn't simply drain through by gravity the way it would through a hole, but instead moves through slowly under osmotic and capillary pressure. The driving force is the moisture gradient between the inside of the pot, which is full of water, and the outside, where plant roots are actively absorbing moisture and creating a consistently drier zone. This gradient is called a water potential difference. The wet side always moves toward the dry side at a rate determined by how strong the difference is. A healthy, actively growing plant creates a strong gradient. The pot seeps generously. A plant that doesn't need water, because it just rained or because it's dormant, creates a weak gradient. The pot barely seeps at all. The clay doesn't know what a plant is. It doesn't know what drought is. It just responds to physics. And that physics produces irrigation behavior that no timer, no sensor, and no human judgment has ever reliably matched, because it responds to actual plant need in real time, continuously, without any intervention. Here's how you build it and use it, because the simplicity is part of the point. Traditional ollas were hand-formed from local clay and fired in open pits, a process accessible to anyone with clay-bearing soil and a fire. For practical modern use, you have two options. The first is to buy unglazed terracotta pots, the basic, cheap, rough-surfaced clay pots found at any garden center for $1 to $3 each, and convert them into ollas by sealing the drainage hole of one pot with waterproof clay, epoxy, or a rubber stopper, then attaching a second identical pot, rim to rim, with waterproof adhesive, creating a sealed vessel with only a small opening at the top. The total cost is $2 to $6 per unit. The second option is to purchase purpose-made ollas from pottery suppliers, which are available in various sizes, and are increasingly findable online as the method gains small amounts of renewed attention. Either way, the installation is identical. Dig a hole in your garden bed deep enough to bury the olla so that only the neck and opening remain at or just above the soil surface. Place the olla in the hole. Backfill the soil firmly around it, making sure the clay body is in direct contact with the surrounding soil. Air gaps between the pot and the soil defeat the moisture transfer mechanism. Fill the olla with water through the opening at the surface. Cover the opening with a small stone, a piece of tile, or a fitted cap to prevent evaporation from the opening and to keep mosquitoes from breeding in the standing water at the top. Plant your seeds or seedlings in a ring around the buried olla. For a standard pot of roughly 2 liters capacity, plant within a radius of about 30 centimeters in all directions. Come back in 2 to 4 days and check the water level. Refill as needed. That is the complete maintenance protocol. Check the water level every few days, refill, walk away. The olla handles everything else. Here is what most people get wrong when they first try this, because the mistakes are consistent and avoidable. The first and most damaging mistake is using glazed pots. A glazed ceramic pot has a waterproof coating that seals the pores completely. Water cannot pass through a glazed surface by osmotic pressure. It simply sits inside the vessel and doesn't move. The pot must be unglazed. Rough, matte, porous terracotta, the kind that feels slightly gritty and absorbs a water droplet into its surface within a second or two. If a water droplet sits on the surface and beads up rather than absorbing, the pot is glazed and will not function as an olla. Second mistake, burying the olla in soil that is too sandy or too loose. Coarse sandy soil has large particles with large air gaps between them. The moisture gradient that drives seepage depends on the soil being in intimate contact with the clay surface and capable of holding some moisture. In extremely sandy, fast-draining soil, water moves too quickly away from the pot, and the system becomes less efficient. Adding compost to the planting zone before burying the olla improves soil texture and dramatically improves the moisture retention needed for the system to function at its best. Third mistake, spacing plants too far from the pot. The effective radius of a standard 2-liter olla in average. Garden soil is roughly 30 centimeters. Plants placed 50 or 60 centimeters away won't benefit from the moisture zone and will show drought stress, while the plants close to the pot thrive. Map your planting radius before you plant, not after. Fourth mistake, leaving the opening uncovered. An open olla neck loses a surprising amount of water to surface evaporation on hot days, which defeats a significant portion of the water savings the system is designed to provide. Cover it. A flat rock works perfectly. A cork, a rubber cap, a piece of broken tile. Anything that blocks the opening. Fifth mistake, expecting results in the first day. The moisture zone around a newly buried olla takes 2 to 3 days to fully develop as water works through the clay and establishes the moisture gradient in the surrounding soil. Plant on the same day you bury the olla and trust the process. The roots will find the moisture within days. The results across documented research and practical deployment are consistent enough to be cited with confidence. Trials conducted in semi-arid regions of Brazil, comparing olla irrigated vegetable plots to conventionally irrigated plots of equal size, showed water consumption reductions, averaging between 60 and 90%, while maintaining equivalent or superior yields. Studies in India comparing Olla systems to drip irrigation, already considered highly water efficient, showed Ollas using approximately half the water of drip systems for comparable plant growth. A family growing food on 50 square meters of garden using Olla irrigation in a water-stressed region can maintain a productive garden through a dry season using water volumes that would normally be considered insufficient for meaningful production. And scaling is as simple as the method itself. You bury more pots, one Olla per planting cluster. More clusters, more Ollas. No additional infrastructure, no additional expertise, no additional cost beyond the few dollars per pot. A large garden can be equipped with a complete Olla irrigation system for under $50 in materials, one afternoon of installation time, and no further investment. The objections worth addressing directly are the ones that sound reasonable until you examine them. Does clay crack or degrade underground? Quality terracotta, buried in stable soil and kept full of water, does not crack from frost at depth in most climates. The soil provides insulation. In very cold climates, Ollas should be emptied and removed before the ground freezes, which is also when the garden isn't producing, making this a non-issue for the growing season. Do roots clog the pores of the clay over time? Yes, some root infiltration into the clay surface can reduce seepage rates over multiple seasons. The solution is to add a small amount of sand to the water you fill the Olla with, which helps clear pore channels, or to briefly soak the pot in clean water to flush the pores at the start of each season. Can you use fertilizer or compost tea through the Olla? Yes, and it works extraordinarily well. Dilute liquid nutrition delivered directly to the root zone through the same seepage mechanism that delivers water, eliminating the surface runoff and nutrient loss that makes conventional fertilizing inefficient. The history of this method goes back far enough that calling it ancient barely captures it. Archaeological excavations in China have found evidence of clay pot irrigation dating to approximately 2000 BCE. Berber communities in North Africa have used a version of this technique continuously for over 2,000 years, burying clay vessels in desert garden plots and producing food in conditions that colonial administrators once described as completely unsuitable for agriculture, until they looked more carefully at what the local farmers were actually doing. The Nazca people of coastal Peru buried ceramic vessels in their agricultural plots in one of the driest inhabited regions on Earth and produced enough food to support a complex civilization. Roman agricultural writers, including Pliny the Elder, describe the use of porous clay vessels to regulate soil moisture in garden cultivation. This knowledge was not developed once and spread globally by accident. It was developed independently in multiple places, by multiple civilizations facing the same fundamental problem: more crop demand than rainfall supply. And every time, across thousands of years and thousands of miles of separation, people arrived at the same answer: a porous clay pot buried in the ground. The simplest possible technology, the most elegant possible result, which returns us to the real question that sits underneath every video in this space. If a clay pot buried in the ground can reduce water use by 90% and maintain or increase food production, and this has been known, documented, practiced, and proven across 4,000 years of human agriculture on every inhabited continent, why does the average person in the modern world have no idea it exists? The answer is the same answer it always is. There's no money in a clay pot buried in the ground. There is no recurring purchase, no replacement part, no subscription, no upgrade, no professional installation, no branded product line. The knowledge is too self-contained, too complete, too free to be commercially useful. So instead of being taught in schools as basic food production literacy, instead of being the first thing handed to every new gardener, instead of being promoted by the agricultural extension services that are supposedly dedicated to helping people grow food, it sits in obscure academic papers and in the living memory of farming communities that never had the luxury of forgetting it, because forgetting it meant not eating. The modern world has more information than any civilization in history and has somehow managed to lose the knowledge that a clay pot in the ground grows food on almost no water. That's not ignorance. That's a choice someone made about what was worth teaching. If this video made you look at a cheap terracotta pot at the garden center differently, if it made you want to bury one in your yard this weekend and watch your garden survive the next drought while everything around it struggles, then share it with someone whose garden dried up last summer. Because the solution was always there. It was in the ground the whole time, waiting to be remembered.